but we're going to begin with what I would describe perhaps as an attack on both sea and air. And this is because the Department for Transport published yesterday the latest assault on systems which work relatively well. This time, seafaring is the victim with the release of the Maritime decarbonisation strategy. It sets off on the same foot as the majority of such government output by creating a solution to a problem for which there is scant or no evidence. The strategy grandly claims to be setting out, quote, the best evidence and pathways towards maritime emission reduction goal of zero fuel life cycle greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, with at least a 30% reduction by 2030 and an 80% reduction by 2040 relative to 2008 levels. So a lot of jargon, gobbledygook, and rather confusing language there. Now, they're fairly thin on commitments. Indeed, they belie the fact that the entire premise of the document and its proposed outcomes rest on modelling, which may need to be updated on a regular basis. Among the subjects raised, and this really is not an early April Fool, is the assistance that wind may give to a vessel at sea. Indeed, here is the BBC apparently reinventing the sail just last year. Now, the document does concede that the maritime contribution to transport emissions is just 5%, but this is considered enough to completely destroy the system based, as I say, on modelling. Now, given the precarious position in which we find ourselves with regard to food security and the fact that over 90% of imported food comes by sea, tinkering with the delivery mechanism would appear to be reckless in the extreme or deliberately destructive. Now, other points to note are the relationship with the rebranded Infrastructure Bank, now referred to as the National Wealth Fund, and the tie-in with the nascent and seemingly pointless GB Energy, which I spoke about last week. GB Energy reckons on delivering a possible 5% contribution of grid energy, but only if the sun shines and the wind blows, and with an £8.3 billion ticket attached to it. So it's no surprise to see it enmeshed with this scheme to dismantle the effectiveness of the sea lines of communication. On that note, there's no reference to the Royal Navy yet, but presumably it can only be a matter of time. Now, to illustrate the absurdity of the strategy, this graph shows the projected decline of the use of so-called fossil fuels to almost zero by 2050. But, as usual, the devil is to be found in the detail. Now, this fancy diagram shows all the many convoluted ways in which technology and innovation will deliver some sort of magic outcome, but I suspect we're not meant to look too closely, for if we do, we will see that it does not quite stack up. In the attempt to remove carbon dioxide from maritime activity, the strategy is unequivocal that there will be a massive increase in dangerous pollutants such as nitrous oxide and some sulfur oxides. The document states that nitrous oxide and ammonia are particularly harmful for human and animal health, and we may require policies that ensure solutions are implemented, end quote, before going on to state that, quote, these processes could have further harmful effects on health and the environment. For example, ammonia can cause eutrophication, acidification, and stratospheric ozone depletion, end quote. Added to this, of course, is the ever-present caveat that carbon may be offset either by paying more or by involvement in some sort of auction process, which would appear to undermine the entire pretext of the scheme. So we should expect considerable pushback. And I would say if you are involved in maritime trade, then this is a heads up for you, but it would be excellent to hear your views. So please do get in touch. Now, aligned with this, and as reported back in November, is the increase in air passenger duty slated to change next month. And we can see that costs for the passenger will go up across the board. And it must not be forgotten that it's the government which says that we expect the measure to have a negligible impact on the environment. So this is really the agenda being delivered in plain sight. And as always, the taxpayer is set to pick up the tab. There's been plenty of focus on 15-minute cities and low-traffic neighbourhoods, but the reality, I think, is that this will go far further, and certainly something we can talk about more in Extra. It will also become relevant, I think, in the next report, although I won't go on to talk about that. And you're going to be flying next month. Have you got any thoughts on this, and indeed sort of sea travel and the threat to it?
It is incredible that we are seriously in the 21st century looking at sticking sail, and I appreciate they're not cloth sails, but nonetheless, effectively sails on cargo vessels, replacing diesel with biofuel. Well, you're talking about food security. Using food product to produce fuel to transport food seems like, I mean, I don't even know where to go with it. It's absolutely unbelievable.
I suppose there's a little bit of efficiency in that photograph shown of the BBC with the new vessel enhanced with its sails. It turns out those sails are in fact made from wind turbine material, so not a total waste, perhaps.
Well, otherwise they would be going into landfill, right?
Yeah, well, exactly, and will presumably at some point. Now, as I say, we'll talk about